Thank you for joining me today for my Celebrate Kansas Voices project. I would like to highlight the story of a woman whose faithful service to both this great state and the field of education is one deserving of praise and merit. She was a loving servant and someone who always sought to put others first, a noble woman who's worthy of being recognized. The individual this project is seeking to highlight is a woman by the name of Marese Anise Ball, and later Marese Anise Laptad. She was my grandmother. Marese was born on February 3rd, 1931, in a farmhouse just 7 miles west of Olathe, Kansas. She was the third of her parents' 4 children, and she was dearly loved by her father, who ascribed her the nickname Little Pigeon, or Pidge for short, a nickname that stood with her for the rest of her life. As with many children born at the beginning of the Great Depression, finances were tight, but Marese never let that get her down, and she always was driven to succeed. You can see her pictured here next to her other siblings. After her family moved into Olathe, following her 3rd grade year of elementary school, Marese spent the rest of her early years growing up here. She attended Olathe High School, and she worked at one of the original Dairy Queen stands at the old Kansas City Road, back when ice cream cones cost a dime and milkshakes only a quarter. While in high school, Marese learned to play the snare drum, and she became a regular in the marching band. She participated in other extracurriculars such as theater, and she was well liked by all of her classmates. After graduating in 1949 from high school, Marese enrolled at Kansas University, where she would go on to serve as a majorette in the Kansas University Marching Band and receive her undergraduate degree in special education. While at KU, she met the love of her life, Jack Laptad, and Jack and Pidge were married on June 9th, 1953. While her husband pursued a career in law enforcement, Marese pursued a career in early education. After 5 years in Hutchinson, Great Bend, and Olathe teaching throughout, she was actually going to give up her career, at least for a time, to devote more time to her husband Jack and her children. But that was when a pivotal moment in her life occurred. After a teacher at the Kansas School for the Deaf had been forced to leave as a result of a medical emergency, Marese was called in to substitute on short notice, and she didn't leave for 29 years. Before further diving into her story, however, I would love to give some background on this incredible school, which is a great part of our Kansas history. The Kansas School for the Deaf was founded in 1861 by Philip A. Emery in Baldwin, Kansas, out of a small home. By 1866, state funding had come in, and this facility was moved to Olathe, Kansas. Originally called the Asylum for the Deaf and the Dumb, the name has changed over the years as sensibilities and a greater understanding of deafness and dumbness have become more culturally aware, and it is now known as the Kansas School for the Deaf. Alongside this school is the William Mara Museum, which displays the artwork of students who attend the school, and there's a heavy focus on vocational training, such as leatherworking, baking, sewing, and other trades, which serve as a key part of the curriculum for this school. Marese faithfully served the Kansas School of the Deaf for 29 years and stayed committed to the school even as it went through difficult transitions such as the switch from oralism to sign-based methods of teaching. What drove her was her heart for young children, and as a part of that heart, she sought out to be a counselor both for children and parents as they were admitted to the school. You see, the Kansas School for the Deaf was not only just a school, but also a boarding school, a place where parents would drop off their children for the year in order to have the chance to gain an education and to have instructors who could teach to their specific needs. During this time, however, Marese served as a mom of sorts. She was always there to care for the children, provide for their needs, whether it be new clothes, food, or a place to stay on the holidays when it was too difficult or unsafe to travel back home. Her children recall many instances in which they would have all different kinds of kids from the Kansas School of the Deaf over for Thanksgivings and Christmas, celebrating these wonderful holidays within the loving care of a family who was willing to serve them and be there for them. As described by her daughter Wendy, Marese had an intense dedication to the children. She wanted their success, but she first needed to make sure that they felt safe and they were safe. As she continued to counsel and meet with the children, she was able to help the children work through lots of the fear as well as the parents' fears that existed with the disability of deafness. At the time, there was not much known about this disability, and so there were a lot of false beliefs and just complete fears that parents had that Marese was able to guide the families through the process of reassuring them and giving them confidence that their child would be able to succeed. I know I mentioned that there was a difficult period for the Kansas School of the Deaf in the transition from the oralist to the primarily sign-based language method, and I'd like to address that here. Marese herself was a huge proponent of the oralist method of teaching, which is a method that teaches children who are deaf how to lip read and how to speak English well so that they have the possibility of communicating and connecting more easily with the rest of the world. While this may seem to be an incredibly positive way of teaching, it brought with it many complications that Marese did not acknowledge until later in her life. For instance, it made learning English much more challenging for the children, as they were forced to learn to speak and to read at the same time. Learning to understand the orders of words and how things were put together was extremely difficult, and it gave many of the kids great frustration and made it difficult for them to communicate amongst themselves, leading to frustration and discouragement. After working for the Kansas School for the Deaf for 16 years, the school made the transition from this oralist method to what is now known as the sign method, which embraces the use of American Sign Language, or ASL for short. Marese at first wasn't really certain about this transition, and it was one of the things that was very difficult for her to accept. But she continued to serve and love the school and the students, and near the end of her career, she had come full circle, realizing that her hope was that the children would be able to find peace and find success in life, and that as she continued to serve and love them, that was her biggest goal, that the methods of teaching should not supplant the love of teaching and the love of the children. The American Sign Language method embraces just that. It's a method that uses hand motions and gesticulations in order to communicate, and it creates a language of its own. Such a language allowed the children to communicate within the School of the Deaf in a way that created a culture for them and a way that they were able to connect more easily with one another, improving the ability for them to embrace written methods of English and spoken methods of ASL, creating a sense of identity and community for the students of the Kansas School of the Deaf. After her retirement, Marese continued to love and support those all around her, both in her family and in her community. The impact she left on this world was not felt only by those closest, by countless others who were able to not only experience her joy, but also the love and care that she brought to every person. She was always willing to serve, and she balanced her roles as both a mother and as a professional educator with great precision and expertise. Unfortunately, her difficult bout with Parkinson's disease ultimately took her life, but her brother left a beautiful message to end her memoir, and it reads as follows. It has been said that a life well lived was a life of service given to others. Marese's life was one of service lovingly given. I hope this video has helped to highlight the wonderful story of a woman who continued to give her life in service of others, someone who loved first and always sought to reach out to those who were needing. A woman whose calling reached her when she least expected it, but continued to commit and persevere through the many trials and difficulties of life. This woman, Marese Laptad, is someone who deserves to be celebrated and a voice and story which deserves to be heard. Thank you for joining me today.